It was the year 2023, and the world had fallen into chaos. A new virus had spread across the globe, and governments around the world had implemented strict lockdowns to try and contain the outbreak. But as the months passed, the virus continued to spread, and panic began to set in. In the city of New York, the streets were empty, and the once bustling metropolis had become a ghost town. The only sounds that could be heard were the sirens of police cars and ambulances rushing to attend to the sick and dying. The government had imposed a strict curfew, and anyone caught outside after dark was immediately arrested and taken to a detention center. The police and military patrolled the streets, armed with guns and batons, enforcing the lockdown measures. But as the weeks turned into months, the situation began to spiral out of control. The virus continued to spread, and people began to lose hope. Food and supplies became scarce, and looting and violence became commonplace. One night, a group of friends decided to venture out into the city, despite the curfew. They had heard rumors of a hidden stash of supplies and decided to take their chances. As they made their way through the deserted streets, they suddenly heard the sound of footsteps behind them. They turned around to see a group of armed men in military uniforms, patrolling the area. The friends tried to run, but it was too late. The armed men caught up to them. The friends' hearts pounded in their chests as they realized the severity of the situation. The armed men were heavily armed with rifles, their faces covered with masks and helmets, making it impossible for the friends to see their expressions. The air was thick with tension as the men ordered the friends to kneel on the ground. The cold metal of the guns pressed against their backs, sending shivers down their spines. The friends knew that any sudden movements could lead to deadly consequences. One of the men stepped forward, shining a bright flashlight in the friends' faces, blinding them momentarily. He spoke in a low, menacing tone. "What are you doing outside during curfew? Do you know the penalty for breaking the law?" The friends tried to explain their situation, but their words fell on deaf ears. The men showed no mercy as they searched the friends' backpacks and pockets, confiscating any supplies they had found. The friends felt a sense of hopelessness and despair wash over them as they were handcuffed and dragged away, their futures uncertain. As they were led through the empty streets towards the detention center, the friends could hear the sound of screams and gunfire echoing in the distance, signaling the chaos that had taken over the city. They knew that they were not the only ones suffering in the dystopian world that had emerged from the lockdown measures. As they were thrown into a small cell with dozens of other prisoners, the friends realized the true horror of the situation. They were trapped, surrounded by sick and dying people, with no way out. They had heard rumors of people being taken away and never seen again, and the fear began to consume them. They knew that they might never leave the detention center alive. And so they sat, huddled together in the dark, waiting for the inevitable. The virus continued to spread, the lockdown continued, and chaos reigned supreme in the city of New York. The group of friends were locked up in the detention center for what seemed like an eternity. They were deprived of basic human rights and lived in squalid conditions with barely enough food to survive. One day, without warning, a group of armed soldiers stormed into their cell. They grabbed Terry, a 20-year-old young man, and dragged him out of the cell. The other friends were terrified and shouted for the soldiers to release him, but they were no match for the heavily armed soldiers. The soldiers pulled Terry out of the detention center and threw him into a vehicle waiting outside. The other friends were left behind, crying and fearing for Terry's safety. Terry was blindfolded and driven for hours until the vehicle finally came to a stop. When the blindfold was removed, he found himself in a large laboratory. He could hear the hum of machines and the sound of scientists talking in hushed tones. Terry was confused and frightened, wondering why he was brought to this place. He tried to ask the scientists who were conducting tests on him, but they refused to answer his questions. Days turned into weeks, and Terry was subjected to a battery of medical tests and experiments. He was forced to endure physical and psychological torture, and he had no idea why he was being subjected to such cruelty. One day, Terry overheard the scientists talking about a secret project, a weapon that could be used to destroy entire cities. He realized that he had been brought to the laboratory to be experimented on as part of the weapon's development. Terry knew he had to escape and reveal the truth to the world. He waited for his chance, and one day, when the guards were distracted, he made a run for it. He ran through the corridors of the laboratory, dodging security cameras and guards. After running in the darkness for a while, Terry stumbled upon a colossal hall. The silence in the place was unnerving. Suddenly, he heard a sound, causing him to take cover behind a nearby pillar. From his hiding place, he saw 3 enormous tarantulas moving past him. The sight of their human-like heads made Terry's blood run cold. Terry's heart raced as he watched the bizarre creatures move past him. He couldn't believe what he was seeing: human heads on tarantula bodies? It was like something out of a horror movie. As the tarantulas disappeared from view, Terry realized that he needed to get out of there as quickly as possible. He cautiously crept along the perimeter of the hall, keeping his eyes peeled for any signs of danger. After a few minutes, Terry spotted a door at the end of the hall. He hurried towards it, hoping it would lead him to safety. As he approached the door, he heard voices on the other side. Terry pressed his ear against the door, straining to hear what was being said. He couldn't make out the words, but he recognized the voice of the man who had interrogated him earlier. Terry's curiosity got the better of him, and he carefully cracked the door open to get a better look. Peering through the crack, he saw a group of scientists huddled around a table, poring over stacks of papers and files. The man who had interrogated him earlier was at the head of the table, speaking in hushed tones with the other scientists. Terry couldn't hear everything they were saying, but he caught snippets of phrases like gene splicing, experimental subjects, and human hybridization. Terry's blood ran cold as he realized the implications of what he was seeing. These people were experimenting on humans, trying to create some kind of hybrid creature. Feeling sick to his stomach, Terry knew he had to get out of there. He quietly slipped out of the door. As Terry searched for a way out, he heard a sound that made him slowly turn around. A giant tarantula with a woman's head was standing right behind him. Terry began to run, but the creature was right behind him. He saw a door, ran inside, and quickly closed it. The tarantula pounded on the door and could break it at any moment. Terry hid behind a bookshelf as the tarantula broke in and searched the room. Finally, from behind the bookshelf, Terry saw the tarantula clearly and was horrified to see that it had Lindsay's human head. He realized that Lindsay had been turned into a weaponized creature by the scientists. Terry noticed an iron rod lying just behind the bookshelf. He waited until the tarantula, with Lindsay's head, had its back turned and then leaped onto it, stabbing the creature repeatedly with the rod. The tarantula convulsed in agony, but Terry did not let up. Taking advantage of the opportunity, he thrust the iron rod into the creature's mouth, killing it instantly. Terry couldn't believe he had managed to kill a big creature. Shaking, he held onto an iron rod and left the room to look for a way out. As he ran quietly through the dark hallway, he felt like something was wrong because there were hardly any people in this colossal hall. Suddenly, he saw two tarantulas with human heads running towards him. He knew he couldn't outrun both, so he decided to fight. Terry felt a sudden strength and jumped up. He managed to jump over one of the creatures and landed on its back. He then used the iron rod to stab the creature repeatedly. Before killing it, Terry realized this tarantula had Brian's head. Brian was his best friend. Although Terry was still feeling sad, he had to face one more tarantula. Using his newly acquired strength, he was able to break two of its legs. When the tarantula fell to the ground in pain, Terry seized the opportunity and plunged the iron rod into its head, only to discover that it was Lisa. Suddenly, the entire hall brightened up and Terry found himself standing in the center. A group of people were standing on a gallery high above the ground level of the hall, applauding. Terry recognized some of them as the scientists he had encountered earlier. In the center of the group, there stood a general with an evil smile on his face, who was also watching and clapping. "You are our most powerful weapon. This is a great success." The general spoke out, content with the successful experiment. Suddenly, Terry felt his body warming up, to the point where it felt swollen, as though his internal organs were expanding. Terry felt his body contorting, his arms stretching, and his hands morphing into sharp claws. He let out a cry of anguish as he transformed into a large scorpion. It dawned on him that the scientists and the general had turned him into a weapon. The anger inside him grew as he realized the truth. It was the general who had released the virus that led to the sickness and death of many, resulting in the lockdown and the detention center for human experimentation. The general was the evil leader, and Terry felt nothing but hatred towards him. As his consciousness slipped away, Terry summoned his strength and shot a stinger from his scorpion mouth, aimed at the group of people on the gallery. The stinger pierced through the general's head, ending his tyranny once and for all. In the end, justice prevailed, and the scientists who had participated in the terrible experiment of human hybridization were captured and sentenced for their crimes against humanity. The government also discovered the cure for the virus in the general's laboratory, which helped stop the spreading of the virus. Terry, the courageous hero who risked his life to put an end to the experiment and stop the evil general, was hailed as a hero by the people. His bravery and selflessness had saved countless lives and restored hope to a world that had been consumed by fear and uncertainty. As for the people who were transformed into hybrid creatures, including Terry, they were relocated to a remote island where they could live freely.